Hi, this is Bob Miles. Over the years, much has been written and said about John Lennon. Most accounts relate his beginnings as a member of the Beatles and his somewhat offbeat lifestyle. On these sides, you'll hear in his own voice the feelings, observations, and real truth about himself, his wife Yoko, his music, and his lifestyle. What is most incredible is that this interview took place only hours before his death. It was recorded on December 8, 1980, about 12 hours before the shooting. The setting is an office in his New York record label, Geffen Records. John and Yoko began with a discussion of their recently completed double fantasy album.
I was possessed by this rock and roll devil, you know. Suddenly I got the songs, you know, just suddenly, like had, if you pardon the expression, diarrhea of creativity. And in fact, we went in the studio and cut about 22 tracks and cut it down to 14 to make the dialogue. They were all dialogue songs, meaning that we were writing as if it was a play and we were the two characters in it. But it's real life, but not real as well, because on a song or a record, it can't be real. I mean, we could have taken it a step further and made this record so maybe she would be called Ziggy Stardust and I would be called Tommy. And then you would call it a rock opera, you see? But we always worked from our own selves as near as we could. So the album, the work we did on this thing is really a play, but we're using ourselves as the characters. And what we sing about in the record and the songs are real diaries of how we feel, but also it's always not really, really real because it's a song and it's on a record and you project it in a different way. We had discussed going back in the studio, but I didn't have the material, but I wasn't worried about it because I thought, well, I haven't done it for a long time. Maybe if I switch into that, there'll be something there. But it just sort of came. And I called her because I was in Bermuda with Sean, and she was here in New York. I called her and I said, well, look, we were talking about recording. It must have triggered something off here because I'm getting all this stuff. And I started singing it to her down the phone or playing a cassette. And she would call back 2 hours later and say, well, when you sang that, Losing You, or she'd come back with Moving On or something. And then I'd say, oh, Moving On, okay. And then I'd be swimming or doing anything. Suddenly something else would come, like starting over. I'd say, hey, well, look, this is what happened. And it started working like, coming out like that. So then I couldn't wait to get back and start then. I suddenly had all this material. After not really trying, but not trying either for 5 years. I'd been so locked in the home environment and completely switched my way of thinking that I didn't really think about music at all. My guitar was sort of hung up behind the bed, literally. And I don't think I took it down in 5 years. It inspired me completely. As soon as she would sing something to me or play the cassette down the phone, I would, within 10 or 15 minutes, whether I wanted to work or not, if you call it work, I would suddenly get this song coming to me. And I always felt that the best songs were ones that came to you rather than... I do have the ability to, you know, if you ask me to write a song for a movie or something, and they say it's about this, I can sit down and sort of make a song. I wouldn't be thrilled with it, but I can make a song like that. But I find it difficult to do that, but I can do it. You know, I call it craftsmanship, you know. I've had enough years at it to sort of put something together, but I never enjoyed that. I like it to be inspirational from the spirit. And being with Sean and switching off from the business sort of allowed that channel to be free for a bit. You know, it wasn't always on. It was switched off, and when I sort of switched it on again, zap, all this stuff came through. So now we're already, we did enough material for the next album, almost half as much, and we're already talking about the third album, so we're full of vim and vigor. Sometimes you think, wow, yeah, great, this is great, we've done it. And then the next time you hear it, well, she's not quite the same as I'll think, no, this is not right, it's not right. Yeah. So I would go yay and nay on it all the time. But I think, basically, we thought, if people will listen to it for what it is and not listen to it with preconceived ideas of how it ought to be or as compared to something else, then if people could listen to it just as if it wasn't even John and Yoko, just that it came over the radio and you accept it or not accept it as you hear it, not as you expect to hear John Lennon or expect to hear Yoko Ono or expect to hear an ex-Beatle or expect to hear whatever, or having read a good review or a bad review. Forget about that. Just get in on the radio, I thought, and it'll be all right. I was taking Sean and the nanny and the family to a little, except for Mother, who was here selling cows, in Bermuda to the Botanical Gardens for lunch, to the Italian restaurant, because I could get espresso and Sean could get some junk food. And I was just walking in, I looked down, and it was a botanical garden, and it said, we're in the office, folks, that's why it's buzzing. It said, Frisia, Double Fantasy. And it was some flowers. And I just thought, Double Fantasy, that's a great title. Because it has so many meanings that you couldn't even begin to think what it means. So it means everything you can think of. I mean, it's a double couple. It's real life, but it's still a fantasy because it's now in plastic and in photograph, and it's fantastic. And it's just it sort of seemed to be perfect for a title of the album. And there's two of us, and it just sort of says it all somehow without really saying anything. It says everything, and it's a flower actually.
The discussion now takes a turn from the artist John Lennon to the man and daddy John Lennon. Indeed, during the late 70s, John had all but forsaken his music to concentrate on being a husband and father.
Even as I put it in my last incarnation, everybody's got something to hide except for me and my monkey. It means really that, one cannot be absolutely oneself in public, because the fact that you're in public makes you have to have some kind of defense or whatever it is. But we always tried, whether it's from Two Virgins through Imagine, through anything we've done together, the films we made together, always tried to get as near to the uncensored, as it were, for what we are, not to project an image of something that we're not. Because having been in that sort of pop business so long and tried to retain myself throughout it, but obviously not always being successful at that, it was most uncomfortable when I didn't feel I was being myself. When I would have to smile when I didn't want to smile. And it became like all that, like being a politician, And what I really got through this 5 years was I'm not running for office. I like to be liked. I don't like to offend people. I would like to be a happy, contented person. I don't want to have to sell my soul again, as it were, to have a hit record. I've discovered that I can live without it, and it makes it happier for me. But I'm not going to come back in and try and create a persona who would not be myself. He was born on October the 9th, which I was, so we're almost like twins. The funny thing, if he doesn't see me a few days, or if I'm really, really busy, and I just sort of get a glimpse of him, or if I'm feeling depressed, without him even seeing me, he sort of picks up on it, and he starts getting that way. So it's like I can no longer afford to have artistic depressions, which usually produced a miserable song, but it was something I could use, So if I start going really deep, sort of wallowing in a depression, I kind of enjoy it or whatever one does with them, the best you can, he'll start coming down with stuff, so I'm sort of obligated to keep up. But sometimes I can't, because something will make me depressed and there's no way I can deal with it. And then sure as hell he'll get a cold or trap his finger in the door, or something will happen, and so now I have a sort of more reason to stay healthy and bright. I cannot no longer wallow in it and say, well, this is how artists are supposed to be, I suppose, write the blues, A boy was really programmed to go in the army. That was about it, And you had to be tough, and you're not supposed to cry, and you're not supposed to show emotion. And I know Americans show more emotion, are more open than English people, but it's pretty similar over here. There's that Calvinist, Protestant, Anglo-Saxon ethic, which is don't touch, don't react, don't feel. And I think that's what screwed us all up. And I think it's time for a change. I took the time. Any famous star or whatever it is where you come under, and I'm not going to name any names, but many of them that had problems with their kids, either killing themselves or in various ways. I don't buy that bit about, quality over quantity. Like an hour a week of intense rolling in the hay together is better than, 20 minutes every day of you being bitchy and just being yourself around him. So I don't try and be the God Almighty kind of figure that never is always smiling and such this wonderful father. I'm not putting out an image of this person who knows all about... Nobody knows about children. That's the thing. You look in the books, there's no real experts. Everybody's got a different opinion. You learn by default, in a way. And I made a lot of mistakes already, but what can you do? But I think it's better for him to see me as I am. If I'm grumpy, I'm grumpy. If I'm not, I'm not. If I want to play, I'll play. If I don't, I don't. I don't kowtow to him. I'm straight with him as I can be. And yes, I can afford to take the time, but anybody with a working wife might be able to afford to take the time if they're not really not a working wife because they're poor and they both have to work. But I know lots of dads who aren't working that hard, who are just sitting in an office all day anyway to avoid life, you know. I mean, they're sitting behind desks and they're doing nothing, just shuffling paper, right, waiting for lunchtime to get a cocktail. But I don't buy that, you know, my career is so important that I'll deal with the kids later, which I already did with my first marriage, my first child, and I kind of regret it. My other son by my first marriage is 17. I don't remember seeing him as a child. It didn't even enter, like most guys are 24, 25, they're too intent on their career, really. Well, Yoko was a poor artist when I met her, okay? And living in not the best conditions, and she had a child, and the child went wherever she went. She took her on stage, you know, I mean, a little squirking thing on the... And she would take her when they were making movies, because I saw, before we got together, I've seen her work and the way she worked, and the Kyoko was running around all over the place. And there are many artistically inclined people that have worked like that in the past, not since the 60s, but in the 30s and any other time. So even if I was poor, it's the state of mind I'm in. I would work out some way for him to be around us somehow, okay? I would have chosen my career to suit that. You don't have to be rich to love your kids. I learned a lot from the child, because they're not hypocrites and they're not phony, and they know when you're I mean, he knows already, you know. I mean, already he makes me feel, you know, anybody with a child that spent any moment with them, you know, and it's good for you, I think, because one does tend to fool oneself, and the kids don't buy it. Because I hadn't been in the studio for 5 years or whatever, so he's used to me being around all the time. Because it's a pleasure for me to hang around the house. I was always a homebody. I mean, I think a lot of musicians are, you know, you write and you play in the house anyway. Or when I was wanting to be a painter when I was younger, it was all in the house, or write poetry, it was always in the house. But I started the work, you know, and he started seeing a bit less of me. I'd let him come to the studio, but it was a bit boring. He was excited, but long story short, at the end of the session, and it was going on, I got back on a night schedule where I'd be coming in when he'd be getting up. So he'd see me at breakfast, but I was a sort of shredded, okay, what, like that. And then one day we were sort of lying down on the bed together, so I'm maybe watching some cartoon or whatever. And he just sat up and said, you know what I want to be when I grow up? And I said, no, what's that? He looked me right in the eye and said, just a daddy. And I thought, I said, you mean you don't like it? That I'm working now, right? And going out a lot. He says, right. I said, well, I'll tell you something, Sean. It makes me happy to do the music. I might have more fun with you if I'm happier, right? He said,
John was about 15 and Paul McCartney 13 years old when they first met. John talked about meeting McCartney for the first time and knowing almost immediately that this was the man he wanted for a partner.
I was saying to somebody the other day, there's only 2 artists I've ever worked with for more than one night stand, as it were. That's Paul McCartney and Yoko Ono. I think that's a pretty damn good choice. Because in the history of the Beatles, Paul met me the first day I did Bebopaloola live on stage, okay? And a mutual friend brought him to see my group called the Quarrymen. And we met and we talked after the show, and I saw he had talent, and he was playing guitar backstage and doing 20 Flight Rock by Eddie Cochran. And I turned around to him right then on first meeting and said, do you want to join the group? And he said, And I think he said yes the next day, as I recall it. Now, George came through Paul, and Ringo came through George, although, of course, I had a say in where they came from, but the person I actually picked as my partner, who I recognized had talent and I could get on with, was Paul. Now, 12, or however many years later, I met Yoko. I had the same feeling. It was a different field, but I had the same feeling. So I think as a talent scout, I've done pretty damn well.